You're listening to the Copywriter On Call podcast. I'm your host, Sara Gillis, copywriter, word magic maker, and owner of What Sara Said. On this podcast, you'll feel empowered to show up online in a way that has you saying, "That's so me." Let's get started. Welcome back to another episode of the Copywriter On Call podcast, friends. I am your host, Sara Gillis, and I am clocking in on call today with my finance coach and friend, Val of Val Marlene Creative. Thank you so much for being here, Val.
Hi, so good to be here.
I'm so glad that you're here. I would love for you to start out this episode just by introducing yourself and telling the audience who you are, what you do, and what you love about what you do.
Yeah. So I'm Val, and I actually am a wedding photographer turned business coach. So I did not start out in finance. Honestly, no part of my story started in finance, but I learned everything the hard way, especially finances and, all of the typical creative brain struggles. I have been through them and, continue to have to grow in them. So I ended up learning how to manage my finances out of necessity because things were just not going well and I was losing money and forgetting about expenses. And so once I finally got that under control, everything changed in my business and I've been able to do really incredible things with the money I've made without hitting six figures. I love to tell people that because you do not have to make a ton of money for it to be significant to your life. So what I love about that and what I love about what I do is that it is so focused on your life and the life change that can come in a way that really supports what matters most to you. So I don't really care how much money you make. I'm not here to make you rich. I'm here to help you actually prioritize the things that you care about and do that in a way that empowers you, even as a creative, to be confident in what you're doing with your money.
Yeah, I love that so much. It's not about how many dollar signs can I add to my account here. It's about
Right.
how can I use my money well, steward my money well so that I'm able to put it towards what matters most to me in my life and also able to understand the numbers behind all of it. I think that was the
Right.
really big key for me in working with you is how can I understand the numbers coming in and going out?
Yes.
I've always been an anti-math person. And so the idea of getting to know my numbers always felt super intimidating. But when working with you and our paths first crossed when I took your Creative Income Cure program. And that was a really transformational part for me because it was me finally standing up and saying, you know what? I want to know my numbers. I can't be scared anymore. I can't sit back and just hope that it's all good. I want to be able to build a sustainable business in the long haul. And so the first step was really working with you in that. And so I would love for you to kind of share a little bit about Creative Income Cure, the program, but also kind of how it's based largely on the method of profit first. So I would love for you to kind of dive into that.
Yeah, totally. So I'll start with Profit First because Creative Income Cure is really built on top of that. So Profit First it comes from a book by Mike Michalowicz. It's great. He's funny. He makes finances less scary. But his whole approach is separating your money by percentages and not just, having a percentage for these different places. But I think the thing that's really unique, because that's not necessarily a new idea, the envelope method has been around forever. But what he really changed is having a percentage for profit and that forcing you're deciding that your business will be profitable. And one of the other percentages is owner's compensation, or I like to use the term salary because that just works with my brain better. So I think those two things, they're two things that I see creatives often hoping will happen someday instead of deciding it's going to happen and building their expenses and the way they run their business around that. So in its simplest form, it's a way to manage your money with percentages prioritizing profit and salary. That's kind of the short of it. So then what I've done with that is even reading the book, and I've read it a couple times, and even when I first read it, I needed help implementing. It didn't necessarily click right away how this actually applies to my business. And so I started to build spreadsheets to help me make it happen and make sense to me. And things like, I think a perfect example is especially photographers who have these expenses that are going to be months down the road after they've already been paid. Like, what do we do with that? Like the cash flow aspect. And that's really, honestly, Profit First is a cash management system, but there are pieces that we need to figure out. How do I manage my cash in my business right now based on my specific business? Because we all have different times of the year that things are coming in or going out, and it's not always consistent. And so I wanted to make a very clear step-by-step process. And I mean, really, I did that for me. And then I started teaching my one-on-one clients, because at the time I was really focused on one-on-one. And I was starting to see that it was making a big difference for people. And, I never would have thought that I could be teaching finances. And so it kind of just fell into my lap because I was just sharing what I did to make it easier for me. And it turns out that's really what creatives need. We need someone who understands and has been there and struggled hard. I mean, I am not kidding you, like really struggled hard. Like this, I can't say it enough. Like so many tears have been shed in my life over finances and spreadsheets and all these things that now I am living proof that you can be very confident in your numbers. I am very confident in what it takes for me to get to where I need to be financially in my business. But I am a classic right brain creative. I have very little of that left side. And so the Creative Income Cure program and course is really about, let's break it down step by step, apply it to your business, and give you the tools to put it into practice.
Yeah, I love that. I think that that's so huge that you've been in our shoes, right? As a creative yourself, but also as somebody who is now like, I've seen the fruits of putting in the work of teaching myself and learning how to know my numbers, how to manage them. Your ability to transcend that kind of transition in your life and say, look, I've been there. I will walk you through this as many times as you need. I have been a person who's counted on my fingers. That was kind of, I think, the big light bulb moment for me is like, oh, she's not intimidating. She's not like, I'm a math major and I really love numbers and algebra and geometry and all the things. Like, you're just not that person. And so from the moment that I realized that you were like me, I knew that I could learn from you. And if you could do it, I could do it. I think that's a really big piece of it.
That's just like, it makes me so happy. Because that's the goal. Like I don't want to feel intimidating, and I want to be relatable because that's the truth. And I think a lot of times we put educators on a pedestal and we think that they have this, it makes them untouchable or unreachable, or like we can't put ourselves in their shoes. And that kind of defeats the purpose of an educator, right? Like the whole point is to learn. They're saying we can learn and we can do what they've done. And so, yeah, I'm really glad that was true for you.
Yes, of course. I mean, I think that we first connected on the idea of finances can be overwhelming, but they aren't unfigure outable, right? And so I want to speak into that a little bit more and just kind of dial it back. Like when you were first starting your business, how did you first start realizing that something wasn't clicking, something wasn't working? And how do you call on that experience and relate to your clients?
So I think it was less of realizing something wasn't clicking, and more of, oh, I now have a big consequence for what I have been ignoring. And I think that that
Got
is
it.
often where people end up. And so for me, there were a few different instances. One of them was, as a wedding photographer, someone had paid in full upfront and included an album. The albums are not cheap, and I should have saved that money that they paid me for the album. However, I didn't even know like that was a thing I should do. It just, for some reason, didn't click because it didn't come naturally, like those are just thoughts
Mm-hmm.
that don't enter your mind sometimes when you're that type of person. So I came to the point where I had to pay for the album, and I was like, I don't have enough money for this. Like, where did that money go? And that was actually, I think, when I created my first spreadsheet, because I needed to know what are all the expenses for each job that I am forgetting about and I'm not setting aside. And so I created this spreadsheet that I had every client's name and put that in there. So I think that, and then also another situation was I had not been charging sales tax and was unaware of how and when I needed to be doing that. And I actually got a letter from the Department of Revenue saying, we're estimating that you owe $7,000 in sales tax that you haven't been paying for years. I was like,
Ugh. Those letters are just
$7,000?
the worst.
That's
Oof.
so much. I mean, that's so much money still to me. And that was so much more money to me then. And so those situations, I was like, I can no longer ignore this and use my creative brain as an excuse. I have to figure it out, or I will die. My business will die.
Yeah. I think that moment of panic, or that moment of like things have to change, is
Yep.
something that is so relatable, whether it's finance related, whether it's process related, client experience, like something has to change is such a key moment. And I love that you're like, well, let's do a spreadsheet. Because I probably would have been like crying in the corner, calling my husband and being like, what do I do? But I love that you took action. I love that.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Well, those other things also happened. There were tears, calling my
Yes.
husband. My husband helped me build a lot of like the really complicated spreadsheets I have. So yeah, you got to call
Yeah.
in
God
resources.
bless husbands. Yes. Yes, for sure. I love that.
Yeah.
So, one of the things that I see online a lot and that I hear from my own clients is like, we run our own businesses, and a lot of the clients I serve are kind of like me, like they've fallen into entrepreneurship. I was a steady Eddie teacher, right? Like I was a teacher for a decade. Everything was figured out for me. I
Yep.
was paid the same amount every month. I had benefits. I had like things I needed to do if I, had a baby, or if I needed, medical leave or anything. Like there were all these processes that were already figured out for me. And
Yep.
now as a business owner, it's like, whoa, you mean I have to figure out all of those for myself? Where do I start? So I have a lot of clients who have tried to figure out, okay, can I take a month off? Can I take 3 months off? Maybe I'm having a baby, or maybe I just want to be present with my kids at, Christmas or something. And so since becoming a business owner, you've welcomed 2 daughters into your family, and you were able to take maternity leave with both. So I want to know how you were able to figure that out as a business owner, and not having all of the processes in place to rely on in the
Yeah.
background.
Yeah. So I think with my first daughter, we had just started, I think it was pretty shortly after I had started paying myself monthly. So I think the first step is to have a regular paycheck. And for some people, that's like that feels impossible because I don't get money every month, or I don't get the same amount of money every month. And it doesn't, like, I don't know how to stretch it, or it just never seems like enough. So the first step, I think, is to figure out what a reasonable monthly paycheck can be. And some people do choose to do every other week. Like, if you want to do it that way, for me, because I didn't need to do it that way, it was like, okay, just one, there's only one number I need to think about. So start with that.
Yeah.
And really, in order to do that, I think we have to have a plan for stretching that money. And that's where those percentages come in. So if we can set a percentage of our income that is going to go toward paying ourselves, then I think the easiest way to manage that, and those who are listening, just take a deep breath. It's okay. Create one extra bank account. Just start with the one extra where that's going to be your salary savings. And the reason you want it to be separate is you want to know exactly how much money you have for paying yourself. And so if you have a percentage that goes to that, and every paycheck you get from somebody you put in there, then you are able to only take a certain amount every month instead of whatever's left over at the end. So a lot of people pay themselves based on what's left, but we want to be making that happen before all of the other expenses. So set a percentage for your salary, and also set a set amount for your paycheck. Like one number that you are going to give yourself every month, not the percentage. So that's a confusion point. I think sometimes, let's say you take 50% for your salary. Well, when you make $1,000, someone gives you $1,000, you're not automatically paying yourself 500. You're putting that 500 in that separate bank account so that it builds. So the way that I was able to pay myself through my maternity leave is I knew how much work I would have to take in order to continue paying myself through those months. So if you don't know what to pay yourself, then that's step one. How do you pay yourself if you don't know what that amount is? So we start with that. And then what I have a freebie called Salary Made Simple that we can put in the show notes for everyone to get, that gives you a formula for what to pay yourself in order to save up for a 3-month leave. And so really what it comes down to is pay yourself less than you technically could, at least for that first year of paying yourself regularly, so that you're saving up that money. So one of my kind of non-negotiables in my business right now is I always have at all times 3 months of my paycheck saved in my salary account that is just there for if there's an emergency, or, in the past years, it was saving for a maternity leave. So it really comes down to paying yourself regularly, knowing what that number is, and then paying yourself less than you could so that you can save for that.
Yeah, I love that. I think that for me, when I was leaving teaching and walking into business ownership, for me, it was like, okay, I just need to replace my teaching salary. But it was more than that. It was more complex than that, because we had to pay for benefits through my husband's work instead of mine, and they were more expensive. And so, I mean, the initial salary, like, what am I going to be paying myself, is just that tip of the iceberg. And then when you throw things in like leave, when you throw things in like, I want to have intentional time off, it can be really complicated and overwhelming. But I love the idea of looking at it as, okay, what am I going to need to book now in order to take time off later? And how can I best funnel the money in a way so that it's not necessarily untouchable, but it's less touchable, right? That's the separate account piece.
Oh, yeah. I think that we don't realize how wrong how wrongly our brain calculates when we're just doing it in our heads. So this is just me to a T. I will always, I don't know if it's over or under, but I always estimate wrong. Like when I'm just
Mhm.
thinking, oh, like it's about this much to this day, like I'm in numbers all the time. And to this day, if I'm thinking, oh, I only need like that much or it'll take that long. No, you have to see it. You have to look at the data and
Mhm.
put pen to paper or, put numbers in a spreadsheet to see what it's actually going to take. And I think you had this experience actually a little bit different than most people when you went through the program. But when we actually list out all of our expenses, we're often like, oh, I'm spending what? And I think I remember
Uh-huh.
you being like, oh, I'm actually not like spending as much as I thought,
Yeah,
you know,
initially, at least, like
initially.
in the very beginning of my business, it was like, okay, well, keep it all down. Try and do all the
Yes.
things.
Yes.
And it took you being like, hey, you're wearing a lot of hats. Maybe you could like outsource a couple of those hats
Yeah.
for me to
Yeah.
be like, oh, I don't have to do it myself. Yeah, I think
Yes.
that, I wouldn't have understood that I could do that,
Mm.
that I could make those investments if I didn't have it written down for me. Right.
Yeah.
And so I love
Yeah.
that that process is there and that
Right.
you really encourage, like, yeah, your fingers, your head, that's great. But don't stop there. Get it
Right.
out on paper too.
Yes. And I think that I love your story because so many people assume that once they look at their numbers, they're going to have to cut all their expenses. And they're
Hmm.
afraid of what that's going to look like. And I think there's a whole lot involved in that. There's mindset stuff and there's like the
Yep.
tactical stuff, but it's not always about limitation. Sometimes it's no, you need to actually be spending more. Like if you
Hmm.
want this life, and that's a big part of my process too, is defining success for you and what that looks like. So once you know what you're shooting for and you know what you can make, sometimes you should be spending more in order to have the time that you want. Not always,
Yeah.
but sometimes. And so I think there's just a lot of fear. There's a lot of fear
Yeah.
around money, and that holds us back. And in the long run, at some point, it may not seem like it's hurting you now, but at some point, not knowing and understanding your numbers will come back to bite you. Something will
Yeah.
happen. And it may
Yeah.
not be huge.
Hopefully it's not huge, right?
Yeah, yeah. Or you could be like me and owe $7,000 to the government. Like,
Right. Right.
yeah,
I think that everybody, when they get into business, fears that knock at the door and it's the IRS just saying, hello,
yes,
hi,
yes,
remember me.
yes,
But it doesn't have to be that huge of a moment. It can be
right.
just a simple shift that, oh, I guess I need to figure out a way to buy this album for this client, right? In
Yes,
the grand scheme of
yes.
things, that's not the IRS knocking at the door. But I love
No.
that that's kind of your first moment where you were like, oh, shoot,
Yeah.
what do I
Mhm.
do?
Mhm.
Okay, I want to
Yep.
dive into a little bit of a different type of leave now. So you had two
Okay.
daughters, you took maternity leave for both of them, but last
Mhm.
year you took a sabbatical in your business, and that's an
Mhm.
entirely different type of leave. And I
Mhm.
would just love to dive in and have you share your heart for that in terms of why you felt like you wanted or needed that and how that was a different process or the same process in
Yeah.
terms of saving up for that.
Yeah. So in like technical terms, the process was the same. Having
Hmm.
like knowing how much I needed to make in order to pay myself through a month where I would not be making any income. And it's a part of my business now that I do a full month off every year. And there's a lot of different ways you can do that.
Right.
But I particularly did not want to do any work. I did not have to want to think about it at all. There are other times that I have done a month or two without clients, but I was still
Hmm.
working in order. So I did that this year also. So actually, this past year, I took a full month off with no clients and no work at all. And then I took another 2 months without clients. So I really was bringing barely any money in order to work on my course and
Mm.
also getting certified with Profit First. And so there's kind of, yeah, two different thought processes with that. But really, it comes down to I I want to be able to be refreshed in my business. And when you just go, 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 and you're always trying, like focused on the next goal or the next thing, we don't realize it, but our brains really need a break from that.
Yeah.
And our creativity is very greatly affected by how much we do or do not stop.
Yes.
And, you know, we hear these things a lot, or we see them on Instagram, people talking about, you know, flowers only bloom in one season. Like, why are we expecting ourselves to be in spring all year long? Things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know that we feel like it's possible because we don't have the tools to make it happen, you know? So
Right.
I really think it comes back to knowing what it'll take, like you were saying before, what you need to book now in order to not work later. And to do that, we have to know our numbers. We have to know what it's going to take. What are our expenses, and what are the things that we're paying for once a year or twice a year? Or, you know, it's not just like the monthly like subscriptions. And so I think it really comes back to knowing your expenses, having that set paycheck, and also kind of just making the decision.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just have to say, I'm going to do this and I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to like force myself to figure out or to do a little extra work. My goal is not to do a lot of extra work to make that happen. I want it to be a natural part of my year. And so to do that, I just need to know that number. What do I need to bring in this year in order for me to take that month off? So there's kind of a lot of aspects, but it really all comes back to knowing your numbers.
Yeah. I love that. I want to just shift quickly to the mindset piece of the fact that you deserve a break from your business, right? Like it's not a thing that you should feel ashamed of wanting. It's not a sign that you aren't filled up by your work. It's not a sign that you don't love what you do. It's simply a thing that we are worthy of as business owners. To step away and come back refreshed, that's not something you have to earn. That is something that you are worthy of. And so if you want to make that happen, knowing your numbers is the step that you need to take.
And I would even actually take it a step further. And not only do you deserve it, but you need it. Like you need to, in order to function at max capacity and to be at your best, you have to rest. And we can't assume that's just going to magically happen. It is something we have to choose and plan for, and then allow ourselves to enjoy. Like you should not be bringing your computer on vacation. You should go on a vacation without your computer, and maybe even you have to delete some apps on your phone. You know?
Yes. In order to fully recharge and rest, when you have created that opportunity for yourself that you need, in order to do that, it's about taking that time. It's not going to fulfill you if you're spending the whole time worried about your money or worried about your numbers or worried about your clients. And so it's about creating that space and that margin and then enjoying it while it's happening. I love that.
Yes. Yeah. And I honestly think that's the same approach and the same thought process that we should be doing weekly, daily. Like having, this goes, you know, in a whole other tangent, but like in order to have balance in your life and to be refreshed and to have the creativity you need to run your business, we have to be able to shut it off daily and weekly. And that comes from, one, I think just believing that that's true. Like we need to believe that, like, remember that we're human. We are not superheroes who can just go all day, every day. That's just not real. And when we can come to terms with that and allow ourselves to just be human, then we're able to function within our capacity in a much better way. And I say a lot, we need to know when enough is enough. And I think that's one of the main barriers to being able to close your laptop at night or to take days off on the weekend. We need to know what is enough. And I think that comes back to the numbers.
Yeah, I love that. So obviously creatives listening to this episode, they might be in a variety of different places, right? So what's one baby step that someone can take to make finances feel just a little bit less overwhelming or scary?
Mm-hmm. So this is probably not going to feel super productive, but I think that it's a non-negotiable starting point. And that is to choose to believe and to choose to work on believing that you're capable. So we need to set aside even the left brain, right brain stuff, the like all of the stereotypes we have around creatives. There's truth to, maybe what we're naturally gifted in or what is more of a struggle for us. But I think that we have put ourselves in a box as creatives and said, because I'm a creative, I can't. And that is just a lie, because even if you would rather someone else do it, sure, I would rather have a CFO. Still,
Right?
even though this is what I do, I would rather have someone else do it for me. However, I can't afford that. And also, it's very good for me to be aware, and to know what's happening in my business. And I think it all starts with trying to strip away those just cultural assumptions about what it means to be a creative. And so even just as in a practical way, the way you can do that is anytime you have a thought that is, I can't, or that's too hard, or I don't know how I will ever, those types of thoughts, we have to nip those in the bud. We have to take back control of those thoughts and say, no, that person on that podcast told me I was capable. So I may not know how I'm capable right now, but I know that I can do it. And so I'm just going to believe that and maybe take one more baby step. Maybe it's listening to my podcast. Maybe it's reading Profit First, something that is, there's nothing attached to it as in like I have to take an action item, but just start believing that you can understand and exposing yourself to more of that conversation in order to help build up your confidence a little bit in that. Because I think if we just go all in not believing we can do it, well, if we don't believe we can, we probably won't. Right?
Right. All of the teaching, all of the tactical stuff won't be able to be realized if you don't believe you can do it in the first place.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. 100%. 100%. I think a lot of it for me was shedding all of the assumptions I made about my relationship with math as a kid, right? Like,
yes.
I was never that person who was great at math. I was always in my teacher's like classroom before school, after school, trying to get help. And it was about shedding that and saying, that may have been hard for me then, but that doesn't mean I can't do this now. That doesn't mean that I can't know my numbers now. And so if you've been there, if you're in that boat, girl, I got you, but Val's got you too. I think that it's honestly about figuring out what that block is, what that experience is, or what that assumption is, and saying, no, I'm going to change the story. I can and will do this.
Yes. Yes. I love that.
Awesome. So, okay, you mentioned your podcast, and I definitely want to have you talk about that. It is brand new, and I'm so excited for you. So tell us a little bit about your podcast.
Yeah, I don't know what took me so long, but I'm glad I finally did it. So my heart behind the podcast is to really kind of demystify finances for creatives. And a part of that is I want to be really committed to two things: transparency and asking the hard questions. So if you want to know how much I pay myself, go to episode 1 and I will tell you exactly what the number is. And it's one of those things that I think more people need to talk about their different version of success and calling it success, because what I pay myself is probably not that impressive to some industry leaders, like even in the creative industry. But that's not my goal. My goal is to contribute to our family in the way that we need right now while only working 2 days a week. That's what I'm doing. And so I want to just kind of disrupt a little bit of our industry standard of success and share real stories. And I am going to be asking guests to share about their numbers. And the other commitment is I'm going to ask the questions that we are all kind of a little too scared to ask. The ones that feel like that's going to make me look dumb, or that's, even I talked to the author of Profit First on my podcast, and I asked him some questions. Like, people push back on this all the time. Like, what do you say to that? How do we respond to that? And how can someone who's really struggling with this part of the process, how can they, overcome that? So I'm going to be bringing on people like tax people and retirement and all of the scary financial things. And my goal is just to make it less scary and to help you feel capable.
Yeah, I love that. I think that having someone in quote unquote our corner, right, that is a creative brain, but is asking those questions that we have always been afraid to ask, or we've always been wondering, but are just burying. I think that having someone who is like us asking those questions, like, that's enough to get me to listen right there. I think that it's so important to advocate for yourself and for your business. But if you aren't in a place where you can advocate for yourself and your current knowledge, having someone like Val in your corner to ask those questions and to just open that door a little bit wider so you can let the light in and see, okay, what do I need to know? What do I need to discover here? And what can I change or challenge about my mindset? I love that you're not afraid to ask those questions. So thank you for doing that for all of us.
Yeah, of course.
All right. Thank you so much, Val, for being here. I am sending you a big virtual hug, and I would love to have you simply share where people can find you online.
Yeah. So I mostly hang out on Instagram. So if you DM me there, I actually respond. So that is Val_Marlene_creative. And then my website is valmarlene.com. Pretty much everything I offer, you can find there. I have spreadsheets. I have my course, my podcast. So lots of different ways we can connect.
I love that. I love that. We will have all of the links for you in the show notes. But as always, thank you guys so much for listening. Thank you so much, Val, for being here. And this is your Copywriter on Call, signing off. Thanks for listening to the Copywriter on Call podcast. If this episode has you feeling all sorts of inspired to show up as yourself online, click that subscribe button so you don't miss my stories or practical advice to help you express your quirky, vulnerable, and authentic self online. Chat soon.